Hello everyone. Just a quick heads up before I start this video. You'll notice about halfway through that I've stopped with all the imagery. It's because halfway through editing, I decided that I'm going to release these sort of stories as audio only, and then I'll be talking about the stories later in the News from the Fringe videos that I do. So, that's sort of my excuse anyway. It's not just because I'm extremely lazy that I stopped halfway through. It's just that it takes so much time to find the right sort of imagery to go with the stories. And so it's just chewing into my time. So I thought it's going to be easier if I just release audio only for the stories. And then I can just talk about them in the News from the Fringe videos, as I said. In this video, actually, there is an image at the end in the last story. It's a photo of something. I don't want to give away the story that the witness claims to have taken. So when we get to that part of the story, just quickly have a look at the video and I'll put that imagery up there for you. Alright, enjoy. The Hooded Thing. I live in North Georgia, almost to the Alabama line to the west. It's a fairly wooded and rural area. 2 weekends ago, I left my house at around 8:30 a.m. to go out and walk at a local park with my Jack Russell, Sadie. It was daylight out, fairly bright and not really cloudy. I wound up getting stopped at a stop sign behind another vehicle. As I was sitting there, I looked to my left where a cemetery is. The cemetery is pretty old and on flat, not hilly land. Most of the headstones are tall and ornate. I always look at the cemetery because I think it's beautiful. I've done gravestone rubbings there. Anyway, as I'm gazing out at the graveyard, my dog starts to growl. It's not a growl I've ever heard her emit before. It was terrifying. She's an easygoing dog that doesn't even bark when someone knocks on our door. She's very laid back, but not that morning. She always rides in the back seat. That's what she's been trained to do, and has never tried to get to the front. That morning, however, she leaped between the front seats and got into my lap, staring out at the graveyard. All of the hair on the back of her neck was up, and she was baring her teeth and shaking all over. I'm telling you the honest truth here. I looked back out at the cemetery, and I saw this thing. It was short, probably about 3 feet tall. At first I thought it was a dog or a deer. How can I explain this? It moved between 2 headstones and came out into a clearer view. All I can think of to describe it is that it looked like a little person wearing a hooded robe. My dog was going mad at that point, and I rolled down the window just a little to see if it was a child or something. The thing bowed up and stopped. It turned in our direction, I guess when it heard the dog barking, and then raced out of sight. It moved with speed that was unreal. I sat there with my jaw hanging open, then looked forward. A man and his wife who were in the truck in front of me were out of their truck and standing there looking stunned at the cemetery. We were the only cars there, so I rolled down my window and the man said, "Tell me you saw that." I go, "What did I see? What was that?" He left his truck sitting there and walked up into the cemetery, in the spot where we had seen the whatever it was. Nothing was there. He even looked around for string or something that would indicate a hoax. The only thing there is a mausoleum-type building, where they keep the lawnmower and stuff. That's the only place the thing could have gone, but it was locked up nice and tight. The man and woman said that it had gone across the road in front of their truck, and then they watched it go up into the cemetery. They had a better view of it than I did, and they said it looked like a tiny, robed monk. We exchanged numbers and talked about whether or not to call the police. We decided that we would sound like idiots if we tried to explain it, and then went our separate ways. I went on ahead to the park. My dog, bless her heart, would not get out of the car at the park, so I wound up turning around and coming home. When I got her out of the vehicle, I saw that she had peed herself. She also wouldn't eat that entire day. Later, I spoke with Linda, who was the female witness to the incident, and I asked her to email me what she and Mike recalled. This is her email. As promised, I'm sending you the write-up of what Mike and I witnessed. I haven't told anyone about it really for fear of being laughed at. I'm just glad that you and Mike were there to see the same thing I did. Otherwise, I would feel the need to be committed somewhere. We were stopped at the stop sign, and I noticed movement on the right side of the road. I told Mike to wait because I thought it was a dog or something, and Mike can't drive worth anything, and I was afraid he'd run it over. It came up out of the little ditch there and walked across the road about 20 feet, if that, in front of our truck. I don't think it looked our way or noticed we were sitting there, to be honest. To describe what it looked like, I would say it was a little miniature monk of some kind. It looked like a midget in a black robe. The robe or coat that it had on looked to be heavy wool of some kind, despite the temperature here not warranting such a heavy outer wear. It almost seemed to dance on its feet, too. It didn't just walk like a human would walk. It kind of shifted and wobbled, and yet it was sure-footed. Mike said, "What the bleep is that thing?" And I started to shake all over, because it just felt so unnatural. I felt like it was either a little toddler that had been abandoned, or a demon of some kind. That's honestly what went through my head. Mike rolled his window down, and the thing didn't appear to notice. It walked into the cemetery and went around that big monument thing that is always decorated at Christmas. I think that's when your dog started to bark, and the thing drew up to a stop and turned. We saw it turn towards our cars, and Mike said, "Mother of God," and started to pray. I was alternating between telling him to drive off and telling him to go see what it was at this point. It heard the dog, and so did we, and then the thing took off like a bullet. Mike jumped out of the truck and ran up to the cemetery. I don't know what he was thinking or why he did that. All the hairs were standing up on my neck, and I started sweating like crazy. I had gotten out of the truck at some point too, but I can't remember when. I just remember feeling like Mike was going to die, and that we weren't safe there. I've never felt so threatened in my life. That's pretty much it. Mike said it basically vanished when he got back into the truck, and he was sweating, and we went home instead of going to the grocery store. He just laid on the couch, and I sat in the chair, and neither of us spoke for a while. When we did talk about it, it was to say that it was evil. Whatever it was evil. And I know that all the way to my soul. I asked Mark if he smelled anything up there. He won't really talk about it much. He just shook his head no and walked off. I think he feels as mental as I do at this point. Oh, he took our fan out of our window and closed it off, locking it. We've had it in the window all winter because we're so hot-natured. He's running the air instead now, and said he felt like something evil was outside the window the 2 nights after it happened, and he couldn't sleep a wink. I hope that's all the information you needed. Let me know if you find anything. Linda. A strange house in Africa. It happened when I was back in Africa, in a country called Zambia. We lived there for a bit as we travelled across Africa. I must have been 10 years old. My brother and I used to ride our bikes all over the streets, and if anyone has been to Africa, the typical scene is a lot of bushes and trees and animals running around. So yeah, it was wild. Anyway, one day we were riding our bikes, and we made a friend. He was actually a Muslim kid. Irfan was his name. Very cool. And he had a bike too. And so we became friends and started riding all the time. Eventually we started going to his place too. His father loved gardening, and they had huge guavas there. One would easily fill you up if you were hungry. Now, their house was always really creepy. Huge windows, creeper plants all growing around the house, winding up poles and windows. It always seemed like something was staring back at me when I looked at his living room windows. They also had a huge dog, an Alsatian. Very scary, but friendly to us. He always protected us while we played or took walks. One day I rode in alone to visit Eefin. Nobody was in the front, so I went backside and found his dad had strung up a goat and was proceeding to slaughter it. I then realized that it was the time of Eid for these guys. So I said hello and went to the living room to see if my friend was there. Now the layout of this place is such that if you want to go to the bedrooms from the kitchen, you have to go through the living room and vice versa. There is no other way whatsoever. That day felt very eerie, and me being a kid, I really sensed it. So I sat there in the living room, and after a couple of minutes, his dad walks in from the kitchen with a very weird, jerky walk and a stale, expressionless look on his face. He was walking jerkily and slowly, and he was staring dead at me as he crossed the room. I felt fear. He kept jerking his way to the bedrooms, keeping his eyes on me the whole time, expressionless. I didn't know what to make of this, and I instinctively found myself standing and shaking. A minute later, Eefin walks in, all happy. "What's up, man?" I didn't know exactly how to tell him, but I sat him down and told him that his dad was in the bedroom and that he's acting very strange. He laughed at me and said, "What the hell are you talking about? My dad's in the kitchen." I was like, "What?" I ran to the kitchen that very second and saw that his dad was there and he was smiling at me. He said, "How you doing, son?" I ran back through the living room to the bedrooms and there was nobody there. I don't know what I saw, but I saw it with bone-chilling clarity. I left that day and returned the next day because the incident had affected me deeply. I felt I needed answers. I knocked on the metal gate at the front with a rock. Nobody came to open it. Nobody seemed to be there. So I opened the gate a little and walked my bike in. As I approached the house, I saw their dog staring at me from around the corner, ears pointed up, growling a little bit. He had never done that to me before. I called out to him, and he just stared. Those big living room windows were right there also, and it felt like something inside was staring as well. Then I started taking a few steps backwards and started making for the gate. I knew something was very wrong. Something was up with this place. As I had a few steps left, I looked back and I saw their dog running at me, coming at me full speed. Man, I picked up the bike and ran. I just managed to squeeze through and slam the gate behind me before the dog got me. It was growling and barking violently. I yelled, "What's happened to you?" Later I found out that the whole family had suddenly and unexpectedly left the place and moved to Malawi overnight. I never heard from them again. The Devil's Bridge. First, you need to know that I'm born and raised in Germany. Actually, in a relatively remote part, where there were, and still are, tremendously dense, huge forests. All through my childhood, forests played a big role. My grandparents had a farm surrounded by dark and dense forests. When I stepped out of the house, even in the smaller town that we lived in, 10 minutes walk and you were somewhere in a forest, which is where we spent our childhood, building bunkers and similar. Where my granddad lived is a very remote area, at the border to Czechoslovakia. Dense forest everywhere you look. In one of those forests, there was a path with a "no entrance" sign. This path led several miles through the forest. It was sort of a shortcut through the forest to where my granddad lived. Because of the "no entrance" sign, we called this the Forbidden Path. There was another reason why the forbidden path through the forest was creepy. Our grandparents told us about a legend that somewhere within the forest where the path led was a bridge or a landing where the devil himself appeared many hundreds of years ago, and he left a footprint on a rock. This spot was called Devil's Bridge. Usually on the weekends, me and my parents, visited the grandparents. It was about a 50-kilometer drive. One time there was a flood, and the main road we usually take was closed. We were already about to turn back and call them to let them know that we can't make it due to the closed road, when my dad remembered the forbidden path through the forest. We all felt a little uneasy, but not really taking the legend of the devil very seriously. So my dad turned around, and after about 5 or so kilometers, we found the entrance to the forbidden path. As soon as my dad entered the path, the forest really hit us, for lack of a better word, because it became extremely dark, and we couldn't even see the sky anymore. The forest got extremely dense, basically in an instant. We continued on the way, and about 15 minutes after my dad started driving down that small path through the forest, we heard a loud bang. Everyone in the car literally freaked out, and we immediately realized we had a flat tire in the middle of this creepy forest. We could hear the flat tire flapping. My dad drove the car to the side, and the entire family, Dad, Mum, me, and my sister, stepped out of the car. What then follows is the creepiest thing that has ever happened in my life, and I remember it still like it was yesterday. We stepped out of the car. We saw we were right there at the Devil's Bridge. It was merely 30 meters away from where the car was. My dad opened the trunk, looking for a spare tire and the tools, and at that moment, we all heard an incredible scream, which I can only describe as the worst non-human scream I have ever heard in my life. We all turned to the direction of the scream, and needless to say, we were all entirely freaking out. There was a figure, a shape, close by the bridge, and it was screaming like crazy. And I don't know what to tell you, but the figure looked like something out of hell. It moved around, up and down, while maniacally screaming and laughing. We immediately jumped back in the car in total panic, and there was only one thought: go, go, go. My dad didn't care about the flat tire anymore, and just pushed the pedal to get away from this place. My mum had a camera with her, and while we screamed and drove away, she pointed the camera outside to the being and managed to take a photo. Since this was in 1970, you still had to have photos developed, so it took several days until we got the pictures back, and this is what we saw.